This is episode 14 with Mario Porreca. Your challenges don't define you. However, how you choose to handle them does. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Laugh at Adversity podcast. I'm your host, Gary Savoy. Having overcome medical trauma, I've made it my mission to uncover all of the secrets to overcoming life's challenges and living a better life. Each week, I will bring you an inspiring person or message. You'll hear from some of the most inspirational people on this planet, including those who have overcome adversity firsthand. My goal is to provide you with everything you need to conquer your challenges and to turn your struggles into strengths. After spending nearly 6 years as a successful chef, Mario Porreca found himself constantly tired, overweight, and needing a change. He decided to leave the kitchen and focus on regaining his health. In just 6 months, Mario shed 70 pounds. With everyone noticing his results and asking questions, Mario saw a prime opportunity in coaching people to reach their health, wellness, weight, and mindset goals. Mario has authored 2 cookbooks geared toward healthy living and has also authored a 3rd book centered around achieving personal and business success. He's also the host of the podcast 10-Minute Mindset, which is designed to help busy people start their day in the best state possible by following his daily GEO method. In this episode, we discuss why our day is built on momentum and why creating a new identity is the key to achieve permanent change. We also talk about the 4 phases of growth and why we should allow adversity to serve us. We also discuss why emotion ignites us to push through change and how we can set up the rules of life so we can win. So without further ado, here's my interview with Mario Porreca. Hi, Mario. Welcome to the Laugh at Adversity podcast. I'm glad to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation with you. I know I came across you by listening to your podcast, the 10-Minute Mindset, which is a great podcast for anyone listening. It gets you going. It's a quick little 10, 12-minute excerpt every day to kind of get you started, get you grateful, get you set, and to get your goals going. So I'd like to start off by having you kind of have an interesting story and an interesting background, where you've come from to start off and then going into coaching and your podcast and self-development right now. Do you mind talking a little bit about how you started and where you came from?
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate the kind words about the podcast. And that podcast is something that has become a real passion project of mine. And it's something that I never intended to really be a podcast. So that's the funny thing. I wanted it to be a morning call to help busy achievers start their day in a better way, because mindset is such a passion for me. And I realized that if you set the foundation early, it'll affect your entire day, because your day is built on momentum. It's either going towards what you want to achieve or towards whatever happens and whatever circumstance dictates. So if you can take control of that first thing in the morning, you can actually build towards the things you want to achieve. And it'll, your days build into your weeks, build into your months, build into your years, build into your decades. And if you don't do that consciously, before you know it, you wake up and you think, where am I and how did I get here? And so it's about taking control of that. And how I got to this point, it's a funny story. If you would have talked to me 10 years ago, I would have told you that on today's date, I would probably own a couple restaurants and be an executive chef operating those properties, because that's what my career trajectory was. I was a chef and I was at the number 1 city club in America. So I was very, very into what I was doing. I was very focused, very driven to do that and become the best chef that I could be. And food is something that I'm still passionate about today, just in a different sense. And so I was competing internationally. I was working really long hours. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week on slow weeks. So I was putting in a lot of time and a lot of effort. And over the course of 6 years, it takes its toll. And the stress, because cooking, if anyone who's in the service industry, you have my immediate respect, because it is just a very difficult way to live. And it's very stressful, very long hours, very hard work. And it really burnt me out. And I got to the point where I was very overweight, and that just being overweight, being stressed, being in that environment, in that competitive environment all the time, put me in a bad place, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And I said, I have to do something. So it all started with me taking control of myself. And how I did that was I went to my father, who's a chiropractor. So I grew up around natural health and wellness, and had the importance of keeping yourself in check and in alignment. So I went to him and I said, help me. And he said, Okay. So I said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Just help me get this weight off and get in a better place. So I did everything he said, and I was very focused on it. And within 6 months, I lost 70 pounds. And so I made a really rapid transformation. And because of that, people started asking me what I was doing. And so I just started coaching them through the same process that I went through. And because of that, within a 6 month time period, I was making more money, more income was coming in from me coaching people than from me cooking. And at that point, I looked at what fulfills me right now the most. Where can I make the biggest impact? And it was through coaching. So I immediately quit my job as a chef and focused on helping people lose weight. And I was a weight loss coach. And what I noticed was within about 6 months, again, 6 months seems to be a theme for me. It's just a time period for whatever reason. But within 6 months of doing that, I noticed that the clients I was working with, they would all lose weight for the most part, but half of them would lose it and adopt a permanent lifestyle change and keep it off, while the other half would lose weight and then inevitably gain it back. And it boggled my mind. I couldn't figure out. And I was one of the people that adopted the lifestyle change. And I'm thinking, what makes people get results but not want to keep those results? And what I learned was from doing some studying and research and mindset work was that it's an identity thing. And your mindset leads to your identity. And as human beings, our biggest need as human beings is to live consistent with who we believe we are. We always want to be consistent with who our identity says we are. And so we live that way. And so the people who would actually create a new identity and saw it for the long term and wanted to remain healthy and fit and had that vision, so to speak, would adopt the permanent changes. And the people who just wanted to lose 25 pounds and just focused on losing the 25 pounds, but didn't focus on anything else, would lose the 25 pounds or whatever their goal was. But then when they look in the mirror, they would still see that heavy person. So even though everyone else saw them as someone who lost weight, they would still see themselves as the person they were before because their identity didn't change. And when you see yourself as that, again, you have to live in accordance with that identity. And so it's just a matter of time before they would physically manifest that weight back. And sometimes they would manifest it back worse than it was, because typically when we have a fear or when we see something that is not going in our lives the way that we would ideally want it to, we tend to put a filter on it and make it look worse than it really is. And so you can actually gain more weight or end up in a worse position than when you initially started. And that is what led me to really fall in love with mindset and fall in love with how, when you have a goal, when you have something you want to achieve, when you have some place you want to go, it's not about just trying to get to that destination. It's about becoming the type of person that achieves that. So if you want to make more money, the first question you have to ask yourself is, how much specifically do you want to make? Because you need a target. Then you have to ask yourself, why do I want to do that? And it can be about traveling too. If you're someone who wants to travel more, where do you specifically want to go, and why do you want to be there? And then once you have those questions answered, it becomes who's the type of person that I have to become to make that happen. And if you become the type of person that's capable of making that happen, and you make that mindset shift and that identity shift, you will keep the results for the long term. Because I'm a firm believer that it's not about achieving the result; it's more about keeping the result. Have you ever seen? Are you a Seinfeld fan by any chance?
No, it was a little bit before my time.
Okay. Well, anyway, I love Seinfeld and I watch all the reruns. But anyway, Seinfeld, there was an episode where Jerry and Elaine, they went and they were on a trip and they were trying to get a rental car. And Jerry goes up, he made the reservation, he goes up to the desk to get the rental car. And it's one of my favorite episodes. It's hilarious. And the lady says that they don't have his rental car. And he goes into this long dialogue about how, so you can take the reservation, but you can't keep the reservation. And when there's a reservation, the most important part of the reservation is keeping the reservation. And that's the same thing with your identity and with going after certain goals. You can get to the goal, but can you keep that goal? And so it's always important to want to level up to the next goal and the next goal and the next goal, so you have something to shoot for. Because if you don't go, if you just focus on getting to the goal and you don't change that identity, you're going to get there. I've seen so many people who achieve great things, but then when they get there, they look around. It's great for 1 or 2 days. They celebrate, and then they go, now what?
Right.
And they don't know where to go. And they automatically fall off of that peak and go into this almost like mini crisis of, where do I go from here? What do I do now? And so it's so important to change your identity and to grow along the way and to keep your mindset aligned with what you want to achieve, so that when you get there, you not only achieve that and can celebrate it in all its glory, but that you can maintain that for the long term and then level up to the next goal.
Right.
So I'm sorry I went on a long diatribe there, but
No, that was perfect actually, because I think what you talked about at identity is really important for a lot of people, because when someone has a goal to say lose 25 pounds, they immediately go to, oh, hey, I'm going to go on this diet. I'm going to go on a keto diet. I'm going to go low carb diet. I'm going to go, cut out all fats, or they go through all of these diets. But it's really, if you really want those results, it's not about a diet. It's a lifestyle change. And you need to cultivate that mindset where you want to be healthy, not just lose these 25 pounds, because 3 weeks from now, when you've maybe only lost 3 pounds and you're starting to get stressed out that you're not getting the fastest change as you were expecting, that's when you're going to, step back and you're going to have a setback and you're going to give up on that. And I think once you, as you mentioned, as you change your mindset and you say, this is what I want, and you make it very specific, it doesn't have to be just diet. Like you said, it could be travel. It could be the amount of income that you want. Then you start to ask your questions such as like, how can I do it? And I think that's how you try to find your identity. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree 100%. But the how isn't the first question you ask. That's what most people ask. Most people say, okay, I want to make more money. How do I do that? And that's the wrong way of thinking. When you want to make more money, the first question you ask is, how much specifically do I want to make? Because you have to be very clear. If you just say you want to make more money, I bet you could go to your couch right now and pull a couple quarters out, and there you go. You have more money. And when people come to me and they say, I want to lose weight, I say, okay, weigh yourself tonight before you go to bed. Weigh yourself first thing in the morning. I bet you lost a half pound or so. There you go. You lost weight. So you can say you have a goal, but is it what you really want? So what do you really want? You hear that story all the time about the homeless guy that comes up and asks the rich man for $1, and he pulls out his wallet and he has $100 bills and then $1 in the middle, and he pulls the dollar out and hands it to him and he goes, ask for more next time, because the world will give you what you ask of it. So what specifically do you want is the first thing. The second question you have to answer is, why do I want that? You have to put emotion behind it, because, your podcast is named so perfectly, Laugh at Adversity, because you're going to hit adversity at some point, especially if you want something and you put energy and focus into it. You need to grow to get there, and growth comes from adversity. So you're going to run into some adversity and some obstacles. And the key is, do you have enough emotion and reasons behind why you want to achieve this to break through those obstacles and get to transformation? Because you're going to go, there's the cycle of growth. There's really 4 phases. And the first phase, whenever you want to achieve something, whenever you want to go into something, or get to a certain place, the identity shift that we're talking about goes through 4 phases. The first phase is called inception. And that's when you first start something, you're super excited about it because you see all these good things that can happen and you don't know what you don't know. So we call it you're unconsciously incompetent, because you don't know the things that you're going to have to go through to get to that point. Right. You just see it, you get excited. Then after you do take the actions for a certain period of time, you go through what we call deception. And this is where 90% of the people quit, because you start to become consciously competent. Or consciously incompetent. You start to know what you don't know. So you're consciously incompetent and you see, I have to learn this. I have to grow here. I have to get through this. And that's when people they hit those barriers and they get that adversity.
Fear starts to set in, and then self-doubt.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. And the people who break through that get to the third phase, which is called transformation. And that's when they become consciously competent. Now they start to be able to do the things that are the new skills and take them on, but they have to really think about them. So this phase is kind of like when you first learned how to drive. When you first got in the car, you turned the car on, you checked the mirrors, you used 2 hands, you focused on everything around you, because you could drive, but you had to really think about every little thing. When you made the turn, you stopped at the stop sign, you looked both ways, all that stuff. Then once you do that for a certain period and you really start to take on those skills and they start to become part of your identity, you move into that identity shift, and that's the final stage. And the identity shift is unconscious competence. We call it you're unconsciously competent, meaning that you just become that person. You just do that. And now after driving for a while, I bet today, if you're someone who's driven for about 10 years, you're probably one of those people. I'm not saying you should do this, but you're probably one of those people that text in one hand, eat a sandwich in the other, drive with your knees, and you're listening to the radio at the same time. Because you're someone who can drive. You don't think about it nearly as much as when you were 16 and you started driving and you took on that identity of someone who drives. Just like when you first start going to the gym, you have to push yourself to get there. But after about 2 to 3 months, actually 66 days is the time period that neuroscience tells us that we need to do something to actually create a habit and create that pathway in the brain. But once you do that for a certain period of time, it becomes harder not to do it than it is to do it. And that's when you go through transformation, because even though you may not want to go to the gym that day, you have that identity of someone who goes to the gym. So you just do it. You just get up and you go and you do it, whether you want to or not, because that's your identity. That's who you are. That's who you become. So you have to go through those different phases to get to that identity shift. And most people, like we say, get hung up in deception because they start to see the obstacles. And if you don't have enough emotion behind why you want to do it, you're not going to want to go through that adversity. And I love the laugh at adversity because that's the attitude you have to have. You have to look at it. You have to ask yourself, how can I grow from this? How is this serving me? And you almost have to thank God for that adversity because you have to look at it and go, thank God I have this obstacle, because if this obstacle wasn't here, I would never grow into the person that I meant to become. Because I would be willing to bet that most of us, there's some exceptions, but most of us, and myself included, if we didn't have these obstacles to get over, and say you wake up every morning and you didn't have to do anything, you were already where you wanted to be, everything was perfect, you probably wouldn't do much of anything. You'd probably just hang out and do, not serve and not whatever. But because you have these obstacles, because you have these desires, because you have these emotions, they lead you to grow into the person that you're supposed to become, that's capable of helping other people, that's capable of bringing your uniqueness to the world, and that's capable of making an impact. And so when you reframe your obstacles and your adversity, and you don't tell yourself the stories of, why does this happen to me? Why do I always do this? Nothing ever works out for me. But you reframe them and go, here's an obstacle. Here's something that's in my way of me getting to where I want to go. How can this serve me? How is this making me grow and take on a new identity so that I can move on to the next step, so that I can become that person, so that I can make that impact, so that I can serve others, and through that create fulfillment in myself. And I think that's the question and the way of thinking that really will help us align with our true purpose, who we really are, and get to where it is we desire to be.
I love that. And thank you too for all the kind words to the podcast, because that's definitely the message that I'm trying to get across, is that people need to change their perspective when they face the adversity, that it's an obstacle, but that you can overcome it. And I'd like to go back to your analogy with the driving, because you talked about emotion, and emotion is what kind of ignites us to keep pushing through and to change. So I think back of, when I was 16 and I started driving, and I was so excited to be able to drive. So yeah, I had fear of, driving on the highway and getting my license and things like that. But I also had this passion of being able to go and hang out with friends and drive myself and becoming an adult. So what has changed from, being, say, like 16 and getting your license and having something so exciting, but continuing to go through with the process until you get your license, versus something, say as like public speaking or being afraid, to end an unhealthy relationship? What has changed from when we were younger to adulthood that we can't get to that phase 3 that you mentioned?
I think it's conditioning, because the way society conditions us. When we look at driving, and if you want to even take it a step further and go back even farther, you can look at walking. When we learned how to walk, how many people, kids, when they walk, when you have a child and they're learning how to walk, they're going to fall down. How many people, after they fall down 2 or 3 times, go, you're just not a walker, just stop. Don't worry about it. My kid's just not cut out for walking. Right. No one, right? You say, get back up, try again. You're going to get this. So we have this evidence of certain things when we look around, like, of course I can drive. Look how many people drive. Of course I can walk. Look how many people walk. And we push them to do these. But when you try to take on this, everyone has, I believe wholeheartedly that everyone has a calling. You have a unique calling. You have a unique gift that's inside you. And it's your purpose in life is to decipher what that calling is and then live that calling with passion to serve other people. So that's what I believe life is all about. And I believe that uniqueness, because it's so unique, you don't really have many references looking around of other people who are doing that. And not only that, but we have all these societal references of people who just do what they're told, who just try to be like everyone else, who just try to live the norm. So when you get to the point where you say, I have this uniqueness, something is pulling me, because that's what your calling will do. It'll pull you. If you feel like you're pushing to get to where you want, that's probably not something that at your core you're meant to do. And by the way, whenever you push something, it always pushes back. But if you're being pulled by something, that's a good indication that it's just part of you. It's who you are. And that's the direction that you're meant to go. And so when we see this thing pulling us, all of a sudden, all these people who don't have the courage to follow what's pulling them tell us that, that'll never work, or you can never do that, or that's too difficult. And we start to listen, because just like when we were walking and just like when we're driving, we don't know whether we can do that or not, because we've never walked before. We've never driven before. Right. But because other people are doing it and we see that evidence, we believe we can do it too. It's just like that story of the 4-minute mile. when he ran the 4-minute mile, and nobody thought it was possible. They thought that your legs would explode or something would happen. But as soon as he did it, like 100 other people did it the following year, because you have that evidence that it's possible. So it's about having that belief, creating that belief in yourself, and looking at the people who've gone before you who have done something similar to what you want to do and modeling them, and not listening to the people who haven't done it. Just like when you were learning how to drive, if you want to go back to that example, how many people would take lessons and advice from people who've never driven before? Like someone who's never driven going, oh, you can't drive. It's impossible. You're not going to do it. It's too hard. Well, we'd look at him and say, how do you know? I'm going to go talk to someone who's been driving for 20 years and figure it out. And I think that's the big difference. It's the evidence. It's how we're conditioned, because we are conditioned to be like everyone else. And I read one time that there was a study done where they took men who just graduated. It was a goal-oriented study, and they wanted to see, how many people actually achieved their goals if they actually wrote them out, as opposed to people who just said, I want to achieve something. So it was about being specific with your goals. But the really cool thing was that I took from it, because I like to look at things a little bit differently than most people, is not only, of course, the people who wrote out their goals have a much higher chance of achieving them, but the people who didn't write out their goals, when they went back to them years later and asked them, well, why do you go to work every day? Why do you do what you do? Why? They didn't have an answer. Even going to work, something as simple as going to the job they were going to pay their bills, they didn't really know why they were doing it. They just did it because everyone else does it. And so how many things do we do? And that's where I come full circle to habits, because I'd like to say, how many things do we do every day that we just do because everyone else does it? Because we created it maybe in the past to keep us from being embarrassed or to keep us from being different. And because we did it in the past and it served us at one point, we continue to do it because we just have this neurological loop in our minds now, in our brains, that it just becomes a habit. It becomes something that rewards us in some way because we think we're supposed to do it. But it doesn't really serve us. And so a lot of the things that we do, if you look at someone and you look at your life specifically, it's made up of your habits. The things you do consistently are the things that show up. The question is, are you being conscious about what you're doing consistently? Are you being conscious and focused and directing that towards the things you want to show up? Or are you just going through the motions every day? Because most of us, we get up at the same time. We go into the bathroom and do the same things. We brush our teeth the same way. We make our coffee the same way, drink it out of the same mug, get in the same car, drive the same way to work, do the same thing at work, get in the car at the same time, drive home the same way, come home and sit on the couch the same way, watch the same shows, go to bed at the same time, and get up and do it all over again. So when you look at that and you look at your day, is it serving you? Are you doing it because it fills you up and you intentionally set that up and you intentionally put those things into place to help you get to where you want to get? And if it is, great, keep doing it. If you're happy and that's what you want, you've won. Keep doing it. But if you look at it and you say, this really isn't where I want to be, I would rather be doing this, or I would rather be living this, or what are you doing every day unconsciously that is either A, keeping you from that, or B, you're doing it because it served you at one point, but it's no longer serving you now, and you can change that. And so I think that's a big thing to think about too.
Right. Yeah, I think that is a good point. I think for some people, I think myself included, after I started kind of changing my mindset as I was recovering from my surgery, I had to start creating new habits. And I think for me, I started reading books. I started kind of like you, I started just diving a deep dive into the self-development, as much books as I could, documentaries, anything that I could really just try to feed my mind into mindset. And what I started to realize is that as I started to trade in, TV shows and my TV time for books, it might have been difficult in the beginning, but now I can fly through a book in like a week or, a few days. And as I keep building up on these habits, it's kind of like, collecting interest. I can keep building up on these habits much more easily than when I first started. It's starting that's the problem. It's the most difficult part. So for people who are just trying to start out and maybe facing some sort of setbacks or some roadblockers, how can you push past that and kind of build that into your identity and some of the questions that we talked about earlier?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. The first thing that I always recommend to everyone is get a coach. Because a good coach, an exceptional coach, will help you get to where you want to be. When you look at coaches, they have a different perspective, number one, and their real job is to hold you accountable for what you want to achieve and to help navigate you the easiest way and the fastest way to get to where you want to get. So if you have someone who keeps you accountable and someone who is there for you and can communicate with you in a way that helps you pull the most out of yourself, that is the best way to go, because they will help you and you will get to work with them. And when I say coach, I don't mean like ask your friend to help you, right? Because friends really aren't your coach. Don't ask them to change their role in your life to help you get somewhere, because friends will always mostly tell you what you want to hear or what serves them more than they'll tell you the hard stuff that you need to hear to make those shifts. Right. So you need to really find an exceptional coach, someone that you really get along with, someone that you know will help you, and someone who's not afraid to tell you the things you need to hear in order to make the changes you need to make. Right. So that's one avenue is that I recommend first and foremost is get a good coach. And whatever you have to do to get that, do the research, figure it out. The other thing you can do is you can set up the rules of the game so you win. There are no rules in life other than the rules we set. So if you were a kid, or when you were a kid, if you were making up a game, wouldn't you always set the rules so you won? Like I remember like playing video games, for instance, and this may be before your time, but when I was a kid, they had on the regular Nintendo console, they had a thing called Game Genie. You remember that at all?
No.
Well, it was a little thing that went on your cartridge. It was a gold thing. You put the game cartridge, the Game Genie on the cartridge, then you put it inside the game console, and it came with this big, thick book. And these books were all these cheat codes. And it had every game listed, and you could get the code. So once you put the Game Genie in, it would tell you what the codes are, A, B, up, down, whatever. And you put in these codes. And I remember a specific game that I used to play called Contra, which I used to love. And it was like this army video game type thing. And you would fight like aliens and stuff, but it was fun. And so you'd have these cheat codes where you could have like infinite lives, the best weapons, all this stuff. And I found nothing wrong with it. I thought it was more fun knowing that I was going to win rather than going in and actually trying to figure out win. Now, my perceptions have changed over the years, but here's the thing. When I was a kid, I wanted to set up the rules so I won the game. What happens over the course of our lives when we get to an adult that we don't figure that out? Now, when you're an adult, when you're a kid, you want to be an adult because you want to be able to eat candy and stay up late and do all that stuff, right? Because you want to set up the rules so you have the most joy. But then when we get here, it's like we forget that. It's like we forget how to do that. So you can set up the rules so you win. For instance, one of the reasons I started my podcast and I do it live at 7:30 in the morning every morning is because I had a real thing about getting up early. Being a chef and being in the service industry and working late nights, I created this habit that was really tough to break where I'd want to sleep in and then stay up real late. And so I put myself in a situation where I was almost forced, where people are counting on me to be up at 7:30 in the morning, be at my A game at that time and be able to deliver value to them. And so that's one of the reasons why I started doing that morning call. Yes, it was to serve people. Yes, it was to get my message out there. But at the same time, I set up the rules so that it forced me to be up and ready. So once that call's done and once I upload it as my podcast, at the latest, it's 9 o'clock and I'm already have a productive day under my belt. So from there on, I feel like I've accomplished something. I feel like I've done something good. And then I have the whole rest of the day to add to that. So the second thing to build habits is put yourself in a position where you're forced to do that. And now, yeah, it was uncomfortable at first and I didn't really care for it. But here we are 8 weeks later, and now it's like part of my life. I can't imagine myself going back and being there again, going back to where I was before and not getting up and being up at 6 a.m., doing my morning routine to be ready by 7:30 to go to do the call and talk to the people that get on there and encourage them and see them succeed. And so that's the other thing is set up the rules so you win the game. And the other thing is you have to really have a clear and compelling outcome that you have in your mind. Visualization is so important. The great thing about visualization is that your brain doesn't know the difference between whether you experience something or when you really vividly visualize it. Right. So when you visualize things, and that's the other thing with identity. So anytime you want to do something, right? So let me talk about this this might take a minute, but it's worth it. Your conscious mind and your unconscious mind are two different things, right? So your unconscious mind, it doesn't care about growing, it doesn't care about achieving, it doesn't care about anything other than keeping us alive. Whereas our conscious mind wants to actively grow, pursue things, experience things. And that's the mind we use to consciously think. So we have a lot of inner conflicts between our unconscious mind and our conscious mind because our unconscious mind thinks if we're still alive, which I hope everyone listening to this is right now, it's doing its job. So it doesn't want things to change. It just wants to keep us alive and safe. And so anything you want to change, it's going to kind of fight you on. And this is what happens. When you get excited and you want to do something and you start to use willpower, say, and you force yourself to do it, your unconscious mind goes to your identity and says, hey, we're doing these new things. Is this us? Is this who we are? And your identity has kind of a supercomputer in your mind. And this is how I like to explain it, where it'll look up every experience you've ever had, everything we have perfect memory. We, as human beings, anything that we've done, and even stuff that happened before we were born, we have in our minds. We just can't pull it up through our conscious mind. We have to open up almost. That's why meditation is so important, because through meditation, you can open up a pathway between your conscious and unconscious mind. But anyway, your unconscious mind goes to your identity, who pulls up all these experiences, and it'll look for references that match what we're currently doing. If you've never done this before, if you've never achieved this before, it's not going to find anything. So it's going to go back to your unconscious mind and say, this isn't us, man. What are we doing? And your unconscious mind is going to go, okay, I need to do something about this. And your unconscious mind is then going to go to your imagination and say, we need to stop this. And that's where fear and doubt comes from. Have you ever been like doing something that you wanted to do? You're somewhat successful at it. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, boom, all these doubts creep up. All these fears creep up. You're starting to project in the future and think, what if I've never done this? What if it doesn't work? What if it does work and I become successful and I won't know how to handle it? What if something bad happens? And all of a sudden you get derailed, and it's this inner conflict that you almost self-sabotage yourself. And that's where that comes from. But here's the kicker. Instead of before and while you're taking these new actions to get this new result, instead of allowing your unconscious mind to use your imagination, if you use it first consciously, if you take your imagination, the most powerful times to visualize are first thing in the morning as soon as you wake up, and right before you go to bed at night as you're laying in bed falling asleep, because that's really, as you sleep, your brain reboots. So you can, if you get up and you go right away to visualization, you build that momentum throughout the day, and your unconscious mind starts to see that and look for ways to make that happen. You do it right before you go to bed. Now, as your brain reboots and you sleep, it'll be implanted in your unconscious mind while it does that. So if you use your imagination and you visualize and you make that a habit, now when you start to take these actions, and now when your unconscious mind goes to your identity and says, hey, man, is this us? What's going on? And your identity goes through your supercomputer and pulls all this stuff up, it's going to see all these references from your visualization.
You're planting those seeds.
Says, exactly. And then it's going to go back to your unconscious mind and say, hey, we've done this. This is us. We've done this before. I see all this stuff. Here's all this stuff. And then your unconscious mind is going to go, great. If this is us, let me help him or her. And then it's going to start to, you won't be self-sabotaging. That's where synchronicity comes from. You'll start to say, in coincidence, you'll start to be like, this stuff just starts popping up. This stuff just starts happening. And it's because you've already referenced that. Now your identity is working with you instead of against you to achieve what you want to achieve. So it's like you have all these players in your mind. You have to align the army to go after and get what you want to get.
Right. And I think we're kind of talking a little bit about your GEO method. But I think it's an important piece to note is that you should start your day off with gratitude and end your day off with gratitude, as well as visualization. And I think you also, at least the O part is, outcome. I'll let you explain that. But you can't really visualize anything unless you have a specific outcome set. So do you want to talk a little bit about your GEO method? And I know every one of your episodes starts off with tackling the GEO method for that day. Yes,
that's a habit that I've created and that I try to help other people implant into their own lives. And I really believe if you start the day with the GEO method, it'll really change the game for you. And the GEO method is simply a way to, it's a combination that I use of journaling and meditation that I start every single day with. And so GEO is GIO, and I like to work it back to front. And that's just the way I like to do it. I start with the outcome, and that's what the O is in GEO. And outcome it has to be two things. It has to be clear and it has to be compelling. So what is the clear outcome, the specific outcome that you want to achieve? You have to pinpoint that, and we've talked about that throughout this episode, so it's got to be specific. And the second thing is, what makes it so compelling? And the more specific it is, typically the more compelling it gets. So why exactly do you want it? What juices you up about that? What gets you so excited to go get that? Then from that place and from that state, we can get into the I of GEO, and the I is intention. What do you intend to do? And what I mean by intention is, what actions do you intend to take that are going to build that? Because once you get into that clear and compelling outcome first thing in the morning, now you have this energy behind it, where if you just leave from there and you just go do your day, things come at you from all different angles. Your attention goes, your focus goes, and you will never be, throughout the day, you won't be at that peak state again towards that outcome. So while you're in that peak state, you need to take at least one action right there within the hour that's going to help you build momentum towards that. So whatever it is, take one action within 60 minutes and then set another action that you're going to accomplish throughout the day. So now you have two action items within the hour and within the 24 hours that you're going to do. And then I like to set another action item that I work on throughout the week. So I have one thing within the hour, one thing within the day, and one thing that I do a little bit for each week. And if you follow that Monday through Friday, you're going to be doing at minimum 11 action items throughout the week that are outcome focused. That's super important that they're outcome focused, because most people, when they take action, it's like a to-do list, and they just put random things on a to-do list, and then they feel really good when they get to check them off, but it really doesn't take them any closer to an outcome because they don't have a clear and compelling outcome that they want to achieve that they start with. So by making your action items and your intentions outcome focused, now you're actually doing things that are going to get you closer to that outcome. And the more important thing about that is now you have a reference where you can measure and adjust. So It's not only did this help me get closer to the outcome, but how much closer? Because there's an infinite number of ways to get from point A to point B. The question is, what's the most effective way? For instance, if you wanted to travel from where you're sitting right now to a mile away, you can walk, you can run, you can skip, you can crawl, you can take a horse, you can ride a bike, you can take a motorcycle, you can take a unicycle, you can take a drone probably. There's a million different ways you can skip. But what's the most effective way? If time is an issue, it's going to be much more effective to take a car than it is to walk. Both will get you the outcome, but one's more effective than the other. So that's why you have to constantly be measuring and adjusting. And I learned this when I was helping people lose weight, because people would come to me and they'd say, I just woke up and I'm 50 pounds heavier. And it's like, you didn't gain 50 pounds overnight. You gained it over the last 3 to 5 years. The problem is you haven't been measuring and adjusting. You haven't been weighing yourself. So you didn't know which direction momentum was taking you. And because of that, you weren't making any adjustments. So you let circumstance dictate where you end up. And because you didn't measure, you get on. And my first question when people say that is, I said, when's the last time you weighed yourself before today? And typically it's years ago, because again, they're not measuring and adjusting, so they don't know which way momentum's taking them. So by being outcome focused and setting up your action items and your intentions to get to that outcome, now you can measure and adjust to make sure you're going in the right direction, to make sure your momentum is carrying you towards what you desire, not away from it. And finally, the third part of GEO is the G, which, as you said, and I think is one of the most important, is gratitude. Because you have to be when you're in a state of gratitude, you cannot have a negative emotion. Gratitude, if you're really grateful, and I don't mean saying you're grateful or just thinking I'm thankful for this, but really feeling it. So my typical GEO method is every morning I write my outcome, and I call it my mission statement. It's my mission, and I write it out, I read it, and I say it out loud. And a lot of times over the course of the week, it'll change because I'll get more and more clear with it, which is a good thing. And then I write out my intention. So I have a journal that I write out my outcome in, and I read it, and I read it, and I say it, and then I take my phone out and I get in my notes app and I put my intentions in there, my 3 things, because that has a little check mark feature so I can check them off as I do them. And then I sit and for 5 minutes and I meditate on what I'm grateful for. And I really get into that state of gratitude. And I focus on 3 things for my gratitude. Number 1, what is one thing that I get to give that I'm grateful for? What's one thing that I can give to someone else? It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be an item. It can be attention. It can be being more present with other people. It can be, and I love the small things. So I always try to focus on the small things, because the things that we get on a regular basis, we tend to get familiar with, and we can fall into this law of familiarity. And when we become familiar with them, we don't focus on them, we don't feed them, and then when they're gone, we miss them. Right. And so I like to look at the small things, because I also believe if you can be very grateful about the small things, when the big things happen or the important things come, you can be even more grateful for those. And it just makes your life so much better and more impactful. So what is one thing I get to give on a daily basis? And that way, if it happens often, it'll trigger gratitude throughout the day when it happens. The second thing is, what is one thing that I get that I can be thankful for? And it can be something as simple as, I'm grateful for the oxygen that's around me, because we have an abundant supply of oxygen. Could you imagine if we only had so much oxygen in the world, what kind of fear that would bring up? So the world's full of abundance. What is something that you get every day that you can be completely grateful for? And finally, the most important one, I think, is and this goes back to identity. What is one thing that I am that I can be grateful for? Because we all have such negative self-talk for the most part. We treat everyone else a certain way, but when it comes to ourselves, we know we'll never leave ourselves, and we know we'll never hate ourselves for the most part. And at some level, even people that say they hate themselves, they really hate themselves out of love because they don't feel worthy, and that's a whole other topic. But when we talk to ourselves very poorly for the most part. So instead of saying, I am bleep, or why does this happen to me, or why am I always wrong, or those types of negative things, I always want to say, I am powerful, I am bold, I am magnificent, I am a miracle, I am a genius. If you say those things to yourself, whatever you say to yourself over and over again, you'll actually hypnotize yourself to believe. Right. So if you
start to create that identity.
Exactly. If you want to change your identity and you say those things, and you want to say them with emotion, you want to use your physiology, you want to put your energy behind them. And if you tell yourself that you're unstoppable over and over again every single day, that will hypnotize you to believe that as well. And then all of a sudden you take on that identity and you become unstoppable. And then when that adversity comes up, you can really laugh at it, because you know that you are that type of person that no matter what happens, I make it work. No matter what happens, it's there to serve me. No matter what happens, life is happening for me, not to me. And when you create that identity and that belief, it doesn't matter. You can focus on the things that you need to do and the people that you want to serve and the things you want to accomplish, because the outside circumstances doesn't matter. Wayne Dyer always used to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And now neuroscience is actually telling us, and physics is telling us, that it's not just a perceptual change. It's actually a physical change, that when we look at things, the way all the particles work and all that stuff, when we look at things in a different manner and we have a different attitude, it will actually physically change things, and it will change our circumstances in our lives and put us in alignment with where we want to go. So it's really powerful to create that identity and to tell yourself those things and to talk to yourself like you're your biggest fan, and to have so much self-love for yourself that it exudes out to everyone else. And that's how I like to start my day every single morning. And we talk about on the show, I allocate at least 3 to 5 minutes to that every show to help people really focus on that and get it. Because even if they don't do it, if they're listening, it's going to get in their mind at some point, and they're going to, maybe something grateful will pop into their mind, or they'll get a little clearer on their outcome, or they'll create one more intention. And those little things will help them build momentum and change their lives.
Right. Yeah. I actually love that. I love starting off too, my morning with gratitude. And I'd like to further talk about, your checklist, because I think that's something that's really important. I know for me, I have daily goals, a checklist that, smaller things that I go through, but I also have monthly and yearly goals.
Yes.
That I review every month. So I like doing that because it helps me visualize on a daily basis. I know what I'm looking for that month, and I know what I need to focus on that week and focus on that day. But I like your checklist idea because that works best for me, because I can check off each item, and as I check it off, it starts to breed confidence. And I think that's important for people to realize when they're first starting off. Is a simple step is to just, write down what you're looking to do, break it down into smaller steps, into a small daily checklist, and then start checking those things off. Because as you start making progress, you're going to start feeling better about yourself, hopefully removing some of that self-doubt and getting progress to your outcome.
Absolutely. And there's a method I like to use, Tony Robbins teaches. It's called chunking. And that makes life easier, because what chunking is when you take things that are typically complex, because there's an old saying that says, if you try to eat the elephant in 800 bites, it gets overwhelming. And if you try to eat it in one bite, it's just as overwhelming. So you have to chunk things into manageable pieces. And the way you do that is, for instance, someone who doesn't go to the gym, one of the reasons they may not go to the gym is because they think it's very overwhelming, because they look at all these little steps. You have to get your gym clothes out. You have to pack your gym bag. You have to drive to the gym, find a parking spot, park your car, walk in, find a locker, open your locker, get changed, put your stuff in your locker, lock your locker, walk the machines, figure out how to use the machines, figure out what exercises you want to do, what body part you want to do the work, and so on and so forth. So they have all these little steps. Whereas someone who has the identity of they just go to the gym, like me personally, I grab my bag, I go to the gym, I work out, I come home. And that's how you chunk things. Even though there's all those little steps in between that I'm doing, I don't look at all that. I look at it as that simple process. And you can do that with your life and the things you want to accomplish. You can chunk things into categories, such as like your personal life, your personal life, your spiritual life, your work life. You can, however it makes the most sense to your family life, however it makes the most sense to you, you can chunk those things in there, and you can say, okay, today I'm going to focus on my family life. Tomorrow I'm going to focus on my work life. And you can, however organizing it feels best for you. But the point is to not have a checklist with 800 items on it. Instead, have 4 different categories with 5 items in each, and then focus on the things that's going to make the biggest impact for you that day, that's going to take you to the outcome you want to go, whichever outcome you are focused on the fastest. So chunking is very important. The other thing is, I'm really not a to-do list guy per se. I write my intentions just so I can stay on point and stay focused, because like we said, life happens and you can get thrown around and everything through the course of a day focus wise. But it's very important when you make those items that you put on your list that you don't focus more on the to-do than you do on the outcome. And that's why we always start with outcome, because as we said, the activity is really not important, because you can always do different activities. But even when I go into meetings, one of the reasons I started 10-minute mindset is because I learned that when I first started coaching people and I would meet with prospective clients, I would schedule out like a half an hour to sit and meet with them, whether we grabbed a coffee, whether we did it online, whatever. But inevitably, that 30-minute meeting, it would be 2.5 hours later and we're still talking. And because I just love to talk to people and I love to help people. But it would throw off the rest of my day. So what I started to do was limit all my meetings to 10 minutes. And we would sit down, we would say hello, get in rapport, and I would try to do that before I actually got there. And then like talking to them via Facebook or texting or whatever. And then it's like, what's the outcome? What are we trying to achieve? What is it that you want? How do we get there fast? And that will just, in productivity wise, that'll change the game, because you're not, it's not really about the process. People tend to want to explain the process. They want to sit and talk about the process. And it's not really about the process. It's about what's the outcome. Okay, great. Now we know where we want to go. What's the most efficient way to get there? Let's go do that. And so it can really simplify things. The same thing with your to-do list. What's the outcome? What are 3 things? And sometimes I like to do, when I first create that outcome and I'm really just starting to get into it, I like to do what I call a brain dump, where I'll sit and I'll time out 5 minutes and I'll set my phone for 5 minutes and I'll just write for 5 minutes, any idea that pops into my mind. Because once you get into that phase of clear and compelling, those 2 things, you get into this phase of this state of creativity. And when you're really connected to your outcome and you're really aligned to it, you set it for 5 minutes, you just write anything, no matter how crazy it sounds, no matter what it is. If it comes to your mind, it comes to your pen, you write it out. And then after the 5 minutes, you take that list and you look at it and you start to organize. What are the things that I think are going to be the most impactful? What are the 20% of the things on this list that are going to give me 80% of the results? And you number them and you put them in order. And then you look at them and you say, okay, now what can I do? And those things are outcome focused. Now that's a list you can use because it's outcome focused. You may not have to do everything on that list. You may only have to do 3 or 4 things on that list. You may have to do, or you may have to do everything on that list and come up with some more. It depends on what your outcome is and what items you wrote down. But at least now you have a guide, and you're not starting with how do I do this? You're starting with what do I want? Why do I want it? And now based on that, here are things that can get me to that result. And that's how you create an effective to-do list, and a list that, because a lot of people, they'll wake up and hey, there's people that I know, they're very close to me actually, that they live for these to-do lists. Because here's the thing, activity does not equal productivity, right? Action, just because you're taking action doesn't mean that you're getting closer to your outcome, that you're achieving. Action doesn't equal achievement. What equals achievement is making progress, making continuous progress towards a goal on a regular basis. And so a lot of people that I know that are very close to me, they just they feel overwhelmed. They overwhelm themselves and they confuse themselves, and they live in that state because that's all they know how to do. That's where they're comfortable. That's their comfort zone, being overwhelmed and just adding things to this to-do list. And they have a million things to do. And as they check them off, it feels good, but inevitably they're adding more, but they're really not even outcome focused. They're just things they think they need to do. So it's not about the activity. It's about what's your outcome and what's the most efficient way to get there. And if you do it that way, if you create that list based on that outcome and you rank it from what's the most important that I think are the most efficient to the least, and you start to do them one by one, and then you can measure and adjust along the way, it'll help you get there a heck of a lot faster.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because when you do have that outcome, in mind as you're creating this list, if your outcome is to lose 25 pounds, doing the dishes on your to-do list that day is not going to help you get there. So you're right. You exactly. have to, your to-do list has to be, outcome focused. For people that are looking to connect with you, where can they connect with you?
Well, my website is marioporreca.com. That's MARIOPORRECA.com. 2 R's, 1 C. I have to tell everyone all the time because they tend to want to invert that, but it's okay. So marioporreca.com is my website. 10minutemindset.com will take you right to the podcast page on that website. So if you just go to 10minutemindset.com and you want to check out the podcast, that's a great way to do that. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. But the best place to really connect with me is to go to my website and join my Facebook group. So I have a Facebook group called 10 Minute Mindset. And it's Build Better Habits 10 minutes at a time. And that's where I spend a lot of my time, and I post a lot of content. And we have a great community of people who interact and help each other focus. And every morning when I do the 10-minute mindset call Monday through Friday, it goes to that group. And I post everything there. So that's the best place to really join the community, to get ingrained, and to really connect. But other than that, you can go to my website and everything's there. So marioporreca.com is really the hub for everything.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to get those links and add them up in my show notes, and the link to the Facebook group as well. Get them up there. So I have 2 final questions that I ask all my guests. The first one is, what is your definition of adversity, and what does it mean to you?
Well, adversity to me is, and because I like to reframe it, as I said, and so adversity to me equals growth. Because anytime I come up against something that is something that looks like it's standing in my way, that looks like it's an obstacle, that looks like it's in the way of my outcome, it makes me, I step back and I say, how is this serving me? How can I grow from this? And I actually am thankful for my adversity. I have gotten to a point where before I used to be afraid of it. And when you let fear creep in, all fear, when you realize that fear is projected worry, right. Fear is not useful at all, because living in the now, all life all life is lived now. The future doesn't even exist because when the future gets here, it becomes now. We're always in the present moment. So it's all about being present. When you can be present and you can focus on what you have right now and how everything's perfect right now and how you can be grateful for what you have in this moment right now, fear goes away. And I like to, if we talk about fear for 1 second, Will Smith tells a great story about fear where he went skydiving. And I've talked to a lot of people that went skydiving. I haven't talked about this on my podcast, where people will sign up for skydiving and they're really excited because it's like a bucket list item. It's something that they want to accomplish, and they sign up for it and they're ready to go. And for the first few days, they're excited. Then about 3 days before, they start to get a little nervous and they start to worry about it. Then the night before, they can't sleep. They're in bed crippled with fear for the most part. This isn't everyone, but a lot of people. They're crippled with fear, clutching this. They're thinking about jumping out of this plane. Then they pick themselves up. They wake up in the morning. They get there, and this fear just gets more and more debilitating. Then they go through the training process. They get in the plane. They go up in the air. They're looking out. They're scared. They go to the side of the door. They grab the sides, and they have a diver that they go with who's a professional, and they go 1, 2, and they always jump on 2 because they know on 3 people tend to hold on. So they go 1, 2, and they jump out of the plane. And the funny thing is, from everyone I've talked to, the moment you're in the air after you jump out and you're hurtling down at the globe at this rock is when all fear dissipates and you realize the magnificence of the moment. But all the way up to that point, the only time when you're in real danger is when you're falling through the sky, and that's the moment where there is no fear. The fear is all leading up to it. So if that's the case, why ruin the present moment, which is all we have? All we have is right now, what we're living, because we only live in the present. Why ruin your perfect present moment that we have the privilege to live by something that you believe may or may not happen in the future? It just makes no sense. So fear is something that, of course, we're all going to feel fear at some point because it's a reactionary thing. But realize that when you start to feel fear, you can come back and say, this is optional. Right. Fear and suffering is optional. I don't have to suffer. I don't have to feel fear. And suffering, the difference between fear and suffering, fear is when you're scared of something. Suffering is when you're afraid of something, but you believe you have no power to change it. So when you believe that you don't have the power, that's when we suffer. So both of those things are really optional. We don't have to do them. We can just enjoy the beauty of the present moment. So when an obstacle comes up, when something happens, I step back and I look at it and I say, how can I grow from this? Why is this here to serve me? Because when you get to the point where you can say, thank God I have an obstacle, because that means growth. Confusion means you're about to learn something. When you have an obstacle in front of you, it means you're about to transform. You're about to break through. You're about to grow. The only way adversity and an obstacle can hurt you is if you run from it. So you have to actually go through it, go over it, go to it, and break through it. And so that's what adversity means for me.
I think you actually already started answering the next question too. So I was going to ask you, what are 3 tips that you can give someone who's facing adversity? I think facing it and going through it will be the first one. Do you have 2 others?
Yeah, I think number 1 is, what are you focused on? And to me, it comes back to our stories, because as human beings, we have this magnificent power of being able to make decisions. Our greatest power as a human being is being able to decide again. So even if most of us, here's the problem, most of us are so afraid of making the wrong decision that we make no decision, and that in itself is a decision. So that when we get paralyzed, when we allow decisions and fear to paralyze us, is the real issue. So exercising that muscle of making the decision and realizing that the next decision is the most important, because you can always make another decision. If you make a decision and it doesn't work out the way you anticipated or you wanted to, you have that power as a human being to make the next decision. So we always have that power. And within that, we have the power to focus on what we want to focus on. And meaning we can always tell ourselves a different story. Events are just events. They mean nothing. Whether you get an offender bender, whether someone says something about you, whether things work out that the way you didn't want them to, they're just an event. When you lose your job, say you get fired, that could be you look at it as a terrible thing, but then the next person that gets hired thinks it's a great thing that you got fired because that allowed them to get hired. Or 2 people can go outside that are neighbors at the very same time, and this actually happened to me. The person came outside at the same time I did that lives next to me, and it was like a sunny 90-degree day, and I'm like, man, it's beautiful out today. It's warm. It's great. And they're saying, oh, it's so humid. It's so hot. It's so terrible. It's the same day. It's the same temperature. It's the same everything. It's just the way you look at it. Right. So when I learned at a training one time, it's a simple formula that I think of. It goes E plus S equals P. And what that means is event plus story equals problem. So when you start telling yourself stories about the events that occur and looking at it in certain ways, it'll cause problems for yourself, because you start to feel a certain way, you get in a certain state, and then you react in a way that you can or can't control. But if you say E plus NS, that equals NP. Event plus no story equals no problem. If you just look at it and you say, hey, it happened, what's next? Where do I go from here? Where do I grow from here? So it's all about the stories that we tell ourselves. And here's the other thing, just to add on to this really quickly. The first reaction that we have, we can't control. It's the second reaction that's the most important, much like decision. So say you're driving down the street and someone cuts you off. You're probably going to get angry. You're probably going to say some choice words, and you're going to, it makes you mad. But then you can step back from that. And that happens so fast, it's just natural. It's a natural reaction. But no harm, no foul at that point, as long as you don't take it further. You can step back from there and you can say, okay, this is what happened. That's how it happened. How do I really want to react? How is it going to serve me to react? And you can say, look, that person doesn't know me. They didn't cut me off intentionally, most likely. They just are trying to get somewhere. Maybe they need to get to the hospital. Maybe they have a parent or a sibling that's in bad shape that they need to go see. Maybe they're having a baby and they want to get there fast. You don't know what's happening. It's these stories that we tell ourselves that make us react. So the second reaction, when you can step back from that first reaction and say, okay, now how can I react in a way that'll serve me? Then that changes the game. So that's my tip is really, what stories are you telling yourself? And there's 3 questions that Tony Robbins also teaches that we focus on every day, second of every day of our lives. And the key is to make them intentional so we can answer them in a way that serves us. So number 1, what are you focused on? What is it? Because you can focus on a million different things in any moment. Are you focused on what I'm saying right now and the stories I'm telling? Are you focused on having to do the laundry later? Are you focused on where you're driving? Where is your focus right now? The second thing is, what does that mean to you? Because is God rewarding you or punishing you? Is it good or bad? Is it right or wrong? What are you focused on? What does it mean? And because of that, the third question is, what are you going to do about it? And we answer those questions every second of every day of our lives. What am I focused on? What does it mean? What am I going to do? And if you can start to consciously answer them as opposed to letting circumstance dictate how you answer them, then you can change the game. And so those would be my tips: is control your stories, control your focus, and take the actions that are aligned with where you want to go to create the identity of the person that you want to create. Let your uniqueness that's inside you shine. Find that unique calling, because we all have something super unique about us that only we can bring to the world. Look, thoughts aren't unique. Every thought, have you ever had the thought that you're not enough? Have you ever had that thought in your life?
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I have too. And and you know what that means? That's not your thought. You don't have to own that, because it's not a unique thought to you. It's not a unique thought to me. It's not a unique thought to anyone. It's like, I look at it like the ticker on ESPN. You ever watch ESPN? You see that ticker of scores that goes across the bottom of the screen? That's what thoughts are. They come into our mind, and we have the choice of whether we're going to use them and accept them or not. So when we get this thought of I'm not enough, you can look at it and you can say, that's interesting, but I refuse to believe that. I'm not going to accept that thought. And you can send it on its way. And then when a more powerful thought comes in that says, I'm amazing, I can accomplish this, I want to do this, you can say, now that's a thought I like, I'm going to keep that. So our thoughts aren't unique, but the way we interpret them and communicate them to each other and the way we serve each other is unique, because we at our core are unique. So it's not the content, it's the way it's delivered, it's the way it's experienced, it's the way it's shared. Right. So it's not about trying to come up with something that no one's ever thought of. It's about, how can I take what's important to me, what my calling is, and how can I use that to serve the world? Because coming through me, it's going to be a unique experience that the world needs. Nobody else can do what you do. Nobody else can uniquely deliver your message the way you can. And not only do you owe it to yourself so that you feel fulfillment, but you owe it to the world to deliver it in that unique way, because only you can do that. And there are people out there that are praying to hear that message from you only the way you can deliver it. So dig deep within yourself, find out what that is, and go on a mission. Make your purpose, passionately live your purpose to serve that, to send that message to other people, to deliver it so that they get the most from it, so that you can make that impact that you were put here to make. And that in and of itself will lead you to fulfillment. Because, achievement, Tony Robbins says this too, achievement without fulfillment is the biggest failure. And so you need to go after that. What fills you up? What's pulling you, and how can you deliver that to other people? And I think that's the most important thing. And it all goes back to, who are you? What stories are you telling yourself? And how can you use your unique gifts to serve others?
Right. I think that's so important. I think we all have unique gifts. Some of us just aren't sure how to uncover those, but it goes back to choosing which thoughts serve you best. I do want to take a minute though, just to acknowledge you for everything that you do with your podcast, for the journey that you came on, from going from, a chef to now teaching coaching and mindset, and just the passion of listening to you speak, and the passion of, listening to you deliver your message and help others. So I just want to, thank you for your time being on the podcast and everything that you've done.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here. And if the message, the conversation that we had together today serves one person, it's well more than worth it, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. If someone can take the words that we said here and we discussed and apply it to their lives in a way in which allows them to pull out their uniqueness and to serve others, it's time well spent. And anytime that I get to have a conversation with someone such as yourself that's on the same wavelength, that has such a servant's heart, that is taking their message to the world and not only thinking about it, but taking action on it and making the world a better place, because you're doing this podcast and you're bringing the message of others into the world in a unique way. It's an amazing thing. So I want to thank you for the podcast and the opportunity and allowing me to come on and hopefully serve your audience.
Thanks, Mario. Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think, as Gary Vee says it, numbers don't matter, influence does.
Absolutely.
And like you mentioned, this message doesn't have to reach 10,000 people, but as long as it touches one person and maybe changes one life, then I consider this interview successful.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mario. If you enjoyed today's show with Mario, then make sure you head over to the show notes at laughatadversity.com/14 and check out all the links that we discussed in this episode. Also, make sure you head over to your iTunes player and leave a rating and review. And make sure you go ahead and hit the share button. You never know what just sharing one simple message can do to change someone else's life.